12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Many men have dreamed of traversing the stars, but very few have had the chance to. That was until a feud between two countries started a blast in the need for space travel. Our journey begins in late 1957, a time when the world witnessed the birth of the space age. The Soviet Union, who was in geopolitical tension with the United States of America, made the first groundbreaking move by launching the first man-made satellite named Sputnik into outer space. Sputnik shocked everyone with its signature beeps being heard around the world when tuning into a certain frequency. The United States and its people speculated what the Soviet Union could do with this technology, and when it was theorized that they could launch missiles across the world, it sparked fear in the U.S. and its people. So thus, the race for control over the stars had commenced, and the Soviet Union was in the lead. The next adventure into space was in April of 1961, when the Soviet Union decided to complete the task of sending a human into space. Yuri Alexeyev Gagarin was a Soviet pilot and cosmonaut who became the first human in space. In 1961, after his launch, he orbited the Earth once aboard the Vostok 1 space capsule, which took him 1 hour and 29 minutes. As a result of accomplishing the task of being the first human in space, he became an international celebrity and received many awards for this achievement, both within and outside the Soviet Union.
Товарищ первый секретарь Центрального комитета Коммунистической партии Советского Союза, председатель Совета министров СССР.
The next human-occupied spaceflight was the Soyuz 1 mission, which was manned by Vladimir Komarov, a Russian cosmonaut. But due to a failure on launch, then a failure on re-entry to Earth, Vladimir Komarov became the first fatality in the race for the stars. Vladimir was commemorated with a state funeral in Moscow, and his ashes were interred in the Kremlin Wall necropolis at Red Square. The American astronauts requested the Soviet government to allow a representative to attend, but were turned down. Meanwhile, the United States tried to catch up by sending Alan Shepard Jr., a Navy commander and one of NASA's first 7 astronauts.
I want to express, on behalf of us all, the great pleasure we have in welcoming Commander Shepard and Mrs. Shepard here today. I think they know, as citizens of this great country, how proud we are of him, what satisfaction we take in his accomplishment, what a service he has rendered our country.
He became the first American to travel into space on May 5, 1961. Shepard was launched into space from Cape Canaveral, Florida, aboard the Freedom 7 space capsule, Auber, which only had enough room for 1 person.
Trajectory looks A-OK.
It is okay.
Pitch control A-OK.
Switching to manual yaw.
Switching.
Tom, how do you read now? Roger, Deke, reading you loud and clear, Harvey. Switched over to GDI.
Now talking to us via a link radio.
Roger.
Bahama Island, and we're reading him loud and clear.
The drogue is green at 21. The periscope is out.
Drogue parachute
The
has
drogue
deployed.
is out.
The drogue parachute has deployed.
Okay, at drogue deploy, I've got 70%. Auto, 90% manual. Oxygen is still okay. And the snorkel's at about 15,000 feet. Emergency flow rate is on.
The medical monitor and the Mercury
Standing
control
by
center
for
reports
main.
the pilot A-OK all the way. The main parachute
Main
has
on
deployed.
green.
The main parachute
Main
has
chute is
deployed.
reefed.
The Mercury spacecraft Freedom 7 is now...
Main chute is green. Main chute is coming unraced, and it looks good.
As was expected.
The flight, which did not orbit Earth, lasted about 15 minutes and reached a height of 116 miles into the atmosphere before splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. The mission was a success. Shepard went on to take part in several other NASA missions, including Apollo 14, which landed on the Moon in 1971. He became the 5th astronaut to walk on the Moon and the first person to hit a golf ball on the Moon. John Glenn was born in Ohio. He was in college when World War II started. Glenn left school to fight in the war. He became a Marine pilot. Later, he trained other pilots. He also fought in the Korean War. After Korea, he became an airplane test pilot. In 1957, Glenn set a speed record when he flew from Los Angeles to New York in less than 3.5 hours. In 1959, NASA picked the first group of astronauts. The 7 men would fly on the Mercury spacecraft. NASA called these men the Mercury 7. John Glenn was one of them. In 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth. He named his spacecraft Friendship 7. He made 3 orbits around Earth. He spent about 5 hours in space. His mission showed that the Mercury spacecraft worked in space. The mission also helped NASA learn more about being in space. After John Glenn left NASA, he became a U.S. Senator from the state of Ohio. He was a senator for 25 years. Later, Glenn worked with college students at Ohio State University in Columbus. In 1961, Kennedy delivered a historic speech that would define the next decade.
Between freedom and tyranny, the dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. Since early in my term, our efforts in space have been under review. With the advice of the Vice President, who is Chairman of the National Space Council, we have examined where we are strong and where we are not, where we may succeed and where we may not. Now it is time to take longer strides, time for a great new American enterprise, time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
In 1965 through 1966, the Gemini program began. Gemini was an early NASA human spaceflight program. Gemini helped NASA get ready for the Apollo moon landings. 10 crews flew missions on the 2-man Gemini spacecraft. The Gemini missions were flown in 1965 and 1966. They flew between the Mercury and Apollo programs. Astronauts accomplished many things on the Gemini missions. The first flight to carry astronauts was Gemini 3, also known as Gemini Titan 3 or GT3. That flight tested the new vehicle. The Gemini 4 mission included the first U.S. spacewalk. Gemini 5 stayed in orbit for more than a week. The Gemini 6A and 7 missions were in space at the same time and met each other in orbit. Gemini 7 stayed in space for 2 weeks. Gemini 8 connected with another unmanned spacecraft in orbit. The Gemini 9 mission tested separate ways of flying near another spacecraft. It also included a spacewalk. Gemini 10 connected with another spacecraft and used its engines to move both vehicles. The Gemini 11 mission flew higher than any NASA mission before. The last mission, Gemini 12, solved problems from earlier spacewalks. On December 21, 1968, the mission Apollo 8 began, which was the first staffed spacecraft to leave Earth orbit and travel to the Moon, orbit it, and return safely. The mission launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spacecraft performed a translunar injection, placing it on a trajectory toward the Moon. During the mission, the crew orbited the Moon 10 times at various altitudes. The crew captured stunning photographs of the lunar surface, including the iconic Earthrise photo. Apollo 8 marked the first time humans observed and photographed the far side of the Moon. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 1968, the crew performed a live television broadcast from lunar orbit, during which they read from the Book of Genesis. The mission successfully re-entered Earth's atmosphere and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on December 27, 1968, where the crew was recovered by the USS Yorktown. Apollo 8 demonstrated the capability of NASA to send astronauts to the Moon and return them safely to Earth, and it paved the way for the future Apollo 11 mission. Apollo 11 was the first crew mission to land on the Moon. Its primary objectives were to safely land astronauts on the Moon, explore the area around the landing site, and return the crew safely to Earth. The mission aimed to fulfill President John F. Kennedy's goal of landing a man on the Moon and returning him safely to Earth before the end of the 1960s. The crew of Apollo 11 consisted of 3 astronauts: Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin. Apollo 11 was launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on July 16, 1969, atop a Saturn V rocket. The spacecraft entered lunar orbit on July 19, 1969, after a journey of approximately 3 days. On July 20, 1969, the lunar module, named Eagle, separated from the command module, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended to the Moon, while Michael Collins remained in lunar orbit. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed the lunar module Eagle on the Moon's surface in the region known as the Sea of Tranquility. Armstrong famously radioed back to Earth, "The Eagle has landed." Several hours later, Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the Moon, followed by Aldrin. Armstrong's historic words upon stepping onto the lunar surface were, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." During their approximately 2.5-hour moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin deployed scientific experiments, collected lunar samples, and took photographs. They also planted the American flag on the lunar surface and left behind a plaque reading, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the Moon." July 1969 AD, we came in peace for all mankind. After spending about 21 hours on the lunar surface, Armstrong and Aldrin rejoined Collins in the command module. Apollo 11 then began its journey back to Earth, leaving the lunar orbit on July 22, 1969. The command module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The crew was safely recovered by the USS Hornet. Apollo 11's successful lunar landing and return marked a monumental achievement in human history and fulfilled the United States' goal of landing a man on the Moon. It inspired generations of people around the world and demonstrated the capabilities of human space exploration. The mission paved the way for subsequent Apollo missions and contributed to scientific discoveries about the Moon's geology and history. Apollo 13 was the 7th crewed mission in NASA's Apollo space program and was intended to be the 3rd lunar landing attempt. Launched on April 11, 1970, the mission suffered a critical failure when an oxygen tank exploded 2 days into the flight, endangering the lives of the 3 astronauts aboard. Commander James A. Lovell, Jr., Command Module Pilot John L. Jack Swigert, Jr., and Lunar Module Pilot Fred W. Hayes, Jr. The explosion caused the spacecraft to lose electrical power and oxygen supplies, jeopardizing the crew's survival. With limited resources and facing extreme conditions, the crew and NASA's ground control worked tirelessly to improvise solutions to ensure a safe return to Earth. Through ingenuity, teamwork, and determination, the crew and mission control navigated a perilous journey back to Earth, overcoming numerous challenges, including freezing temperatures, limited power, and the need to adapt the lunar module as a lifeboat. After a tense and dramatic 6-day mission, Apollo 13 successfully splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on April 17, 1970. The mission was hailed as a triumph of human ingenuity and resilience, highlighting the extraordinary capabilities of NASA and the courage of the astronauts involved. The events of Apollo 13 underscored the risks inherent in space exploration while highlighting the importance of preparation, problem-solving, and collaboration in overcoming adversity. Salyut 1 and Skylab were pioneering space stations launched by the Soviet Union and the United States, respectively, during the early 1970s. These missions represented significant milestones in human space exploration, laying the groundwork for long-duration space habitation and scientific research in orbit. Salyut 1 was the world's first space station, launched by the Soviet Union on April 19, 1971. It served as a precursor to future Soviet space stations, paving the way for the development of the MIR, and later the International Space Station. Salyut 1 was equipped with scientific instruments and living quarters for cosmonauts, enabling extended stays in space. However, the mission faced technical challenges, including issues with its life support systems, and had a short operational lifespan, with only one crewed mission successfully docking with the station. Skylab, launched by the United States on May 14, 1973, was NASA's response to the Soviet space station program. It was the first American space station and was designed to conduct scientific experiments and study the effects of long-duration spaceflight on the human body. Skylab had various research facilities, including laboratories, living quarters, and solar observatories. The station hosted 3 crewed missions, each lasting several weeks, during its operational life. Both Salyut 1 and Skylab represented significant achievements in space exploration, demonstrating the feasibility of human habitation in orbit and paving the way for future space station missions. These missions provided valuable insights into the challenges of living and working in space and laid the foundation for the construction and operation of more complex and enduring space habitats, such as the ISS. The Viking 1 and Viking 2 missions were NASA's pioneering efforts to explore the surface of Mars and search for signs of past or present life. Launched in 1975, Viking 1 and Viking 2 consisted of 2 spacecraft, each comprising an orbiter and a lander. These missions represented the first successful landings on Mars and marked significant advancements in robotic exploration of the Red Planet. Viking 1 was launched on August 20, 1975, followed by Viking 2 on September 9, 1975. Both spacecrafts entered orbit around Mars in 1976 before descending to the Martian surface to conduct scientific experiments. Each lander was equipped with a suite of instruments designed to analyze the composition of Martian soil and search for organic molecules, as well as cameras to capture images of the Martian landscape. Viking 1 successfully landed on July 20, 1976, in the Chryse-Planitia region of Mars, while Viking 2 touched down on September 3, 1976, in the Utopia-Planitia region. Both landers transmitted data and images back to Earth, providing valuable insights into the geology, climate, and atmosphere of Mars. Among the notable achievements of the Viking missions were the detection of complex organic compounds in Martian soil and the confirmation of the absence of surface liquid water at the landing sites. While the results of the Viking experiments did not definitively confirm the presence of life on Mars, they laid the groundwork for future Mars exploration missions and contributed significantly to our understanding of the Red Planet's history and potential habitability. The Apollo-Soyuz test project, conducted in 1975, marked a historic moment in space exploration as it represented the first joint mission between the United States and the Soviet Union, 2 former space rivals during the Cold War. The mission aimed to demonstrate international cooperation in space and pave the way for future collaborative efforts. The mission involved the docking of an American Apollo spacecraft with a Soviet Soyuz spacecraft in orbit around the Earth. Launched on July 15, 1975, the Apollo spacecraft carried a crew of 3 American astronauts, Thomas Stafford, Vance Brand, and Donald Slayton, while the Soyuz spacecraft was crewed by 2 Soviet cosmonauts, Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. The historic rendezvous and docking of the 2 spacecraft took place on July 17, 1975, marking a symbolic moment of unity and cooperation between the 2 superpowers. The crews conducted joint experiments and exchanged gifts, emphasizing the spirit of goodwill and collaboration in space exploration. The Apollo-Soyuz test project demonstrated that despite political differences on Earth, nations could come together for peaceful purposes in space. The mission laid the groundwork for future international partnerships in space exploration, including the development of the International Space Station, where astronauts from multiple countries work together on scientific research and exploration missions. Overall, the Apollo-Soyuz test project represented a significant step forward in space diplomacy and contributed to fostering cooperation and understanding between the United States and the Soviet Union during a period of heightened tensions in the Cold War era. These events represent significant achievements in the space race, displaying technological advancements and the exploration of new frontiers in space. The space race laid the groundwork for ongoing space exploration efforts by nations worldwide.